It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leone, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Hey, Irwin.
Not just Amagansett. Beach Hampton, Amagansett.
And you know, having grown up here, it's like I knew this area was there, but it was like the Napeague stretch was like a different thing back when I was a kid.
Really?
Well, the stretchy stretch was really much more barren, I have to say,
Right.
and like much more dunescape. And today you have like,
The hotels and things of that
well, there were
nature.
the hotels.
Okay.
There were the hotels. I mean, back before even me, there were
Right.
the billboards, but it was like almost like a lunar landscape to me, right? It was very sort of barren and this area must have been just tucked in there, and I never knew about it. Is what I'm trying to get at.
That's so funny you use that term, lunar landscape, because when I go to the Walking Dunes, I always which is
right.
to the north of it, obviously. But I always sort of say it feels like walking on the moon when you're at the Walking Dunes.
It's the same thing for me. So
and not to mention, like we've spoken about this in prior episodes, like how when you go west along Bluff Road, say from the lanes. And I'm not going to say Amagansett Dunes. I'm going to say Beach Hampton, because Amagansett Dunes is a real estate term I've heard from a couple of residents who actually will chime in this episode a little bit later. But this is Beach Hampton, not Amagansett Dunes. And we've spoken about this. Bensonhurst is a Brooklyn neighborhood. Prospect Lefferts is a creation. So anyway, but it does have a really cool history. And, Esperanza, when we're going to get into this, it's interesting how, and I'm going to quote Richard B. Allen. Now, Richard B. Allen, beginning in the 1920s, began buying this dune land east of the village Amagansett. And we're culling a lot of this information from I get these emails every quarter, and I think you probably do.
I do.
Art and Architecture Quarterly. You mentioned his name. Jeff Heatley is one of the people involved. Really, always chock full of really cool information, solid information, and we're getting a lot of that from him. But again, this goes right to the heart of things we've spoken about on Our Hamptons previously. Richard B. Allen began buying this land. And ultimately, by 1936, remember, he started buying in the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, remember, again, here's another one of those sweet spots, the 20s into the 30s, when Mid-Hamptons was being discussed. And
exactly. It was like the roaring 20s, really? It was like limitless, right? People felt like they could do anything, and then they couldn't.
They felt like they could do anything until they couldn't. Exactly. Yeah. And you brought this point up a couple of times when we went back to this era, how, the Depression happened, an economic downturn. So, but meanwhile, by 36, so we're going to go somewhere over a 10 plus year period, he ultimately owned a vast, really a 1 mile tract along the ocean. Basically the boundaries, if we go on a map, Beach Lane to Napeague Lane. Now, Beach is really right after, just east of Atlantic Avenue, so like sort of the end of the lanes, and that's where Beach Hampton starts. To Napeague Lane, which should be, whatever you want, the present day, really the outlet for Truck Beach is at the end of Napeague Lane. And again, here's the point that we have to really bring across, because again, this goes right to prior episodes. Leisure-rama, Montauk Shores, Sands, all of these communities, Mr. Allen set out to develop a community of beach houses for the middle class.
Indeed.
Which he called Beach Hampton. And that was his objective. And we're going to get into just how, because let's just say, as we go along, present day Beach Hampton, still see some of the remnants, but not all that evocative of the original vision of Mr. Allen, right,
I
Esperanza?
think you're right. I was thinking about, you mentioned mid Hamptons, and we've talked about this, you and I, this sort of the branding of the Hamptons, right? And
Yes.
here yet again is another
You're right.
branding opportunity. But I'm starting to wonder, actually, was this like a middle class branding? I mean, I'm starting to think that the Hamptons is not so like luxury based. It was really something that was more of a,
That's a
I don't know. I'm getting
now,
a
now
little.
we're going off outline right now, ladies and gentlemen of our Hamptons audience, but it's a great point Esperanza brings up, because if you recall, when we had a conversation with the executive director of the Hampton Bays Historical Society as well, who in the 20s they changed from good ground, also in early 1920s, for that cachet to call it Hampton Bays.
Yeah.
And to your point, Esperanza, that was also, I mean, she said it on the podcast, like that was really geared more towards a middle class. It wasn't Southampton
working
Village.
Middle class, exactly.
Just work, real people making a living that could scrap together this money and were able to afford a second home.
Yeah.
And great point. I wonder.
Just it's a wonder.
It's definitely food for thought. But so Mr. Allen put this out here, how Beach Hampton, I love this line, by the way, ideally located at the extreme eastern end of Long Island. I mean, in 1920s, 30s, there was no Long Island Expressway running out here. This
was extreme.
This was extreme. This
extremely
was,
remote.
You would have been better off flying to the Bahamas. I mean,
to Bermuda. What?
Right. And it was on one of the finest shores of the broad, cool Atlantic. And he actually writes, yes, yet less than 3 hours from New York City, which by train might have been, it could not possibly have been by car.
I don't know, but I have to say, not much has changed. In fact, it takes longer.
That's also true now that you mentioned it. But and how? I mean, listen to this. Listen to this. This is by the way an excerpt from. I love this. Listen to who wrote this booklet, Esperanza. Maybe it was Richard Allen himself or hired somebody. How about this is an excerpt from, God, this is poetic. Eastward to the Sea, the Romance of Beach Hampton.
That is telling you the branding. Man, I mean, it's like Madison Avenue on this.
My gosh. I mean, and it was
Mad Men before the Mad Men.
Exactly. And this was a 24, according to, this is again from AAQ, this was a 24-page booklet in 1937 mailed to prospective purchasers who responded to advertisements placed in New York City and Long Island newspapers.
I wonder, like there was, with Mid-Hamptons, there was like a Long Island Chamber of Commerce, but it was run out of New York City, right? So exactly. I would think, who knows if, a Chamber of Commerce, it's incredible, these machines that were promoting these things, right?
Yeah. I mean, but again, to the point is, which we've been bringing up. This is going on in 1922 Hampton Bays, 1920s and 30s Wainscott / Mid-Hamptons, 1920s, 30s Amagansett /
Montauk.
Beach Hampton, Montauk. Exactly. Just extraordinary story. And again, it really was such a good point about the branding here, because Amagansett, unlike South, Bridge, East, Hampton Bay, doesn't have Hampton in its name. They
so true
incorporated that Hampton name. But so, and Mr. Allen set up to develop this community of beach houses for the middle class, but within it, now we have to bring in the Barbour Beach Hampton Club. So this was not just going to be just housing. There was a New York City restaurateur at the time, Ella Barbour, and it was designed by the firm of Scheffer. More about Scheffer later. His fingerprints were all over Beach Hampton, Alfred Scheffer, but they constructed on Marine Boulevard. Now, Marine Boulevard, Esperanza, correct me if I'm wrong, runs parallel to the ocean, on East-West Street, oceanfront. They constructed this with a bowed front, a band of windows over flush pine siding, streamlined tubular steel railing overlooking an overhanging sun deck. One of the earliest modernist buildings on Long Island. And again, Scheffer was a modernist architect. His partner Tichy, I don't know as much about him, but I assume he was. Ella Barbour described her restaurant as being a conservative, modern type of architecture with an interior of extreme simplicity. It's what Barbour, Scheffer, and Tichy saw as appropriate for what was, and again, we're going back to this 1930s, a beachfront restaurant in very quiet, very undeveloped Beach Hampton.
Beach Hampton, Amagansett, yeah.
At Beach Hampton, Amagansett. But alas, Esperanza, timing.
Gee, if it's not the Great Depression, it's...
I mean, or something else we've touched on episodes of Our Hamptons.
Yeah.
Fires.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. If it's not a human disaster, it's a natural disaster. It's
right. Exactly. So this finance, I mean, she financed this. She sunk a ton of money, had these prominent architects to design the building. It was constructed in the spring of 1938 and swept away in the September of the same year. I mean, 5 months, 6 months, whatever it lasted, 4 months.
Yeah, the massive hurricane of 38.
I mean, just now 4 months later, after this went down, Richard Allen asked Alfred Scheffer, hey, let's design a new clubhouse. Let's replace this restaurant. There was a rendering completed in 39, proposed Beach Hampton Club, 2 stories, colonial revival design, column portico, reflecting the taste of Richard Allen, but alas, never built.
Doesn't sound as interesting as the first iteration anyway.
I was thinking that.
Maybe that's why.
Yeah, I was thinking, it's funny you said that because I was saying, wow, this Barbour design, this was like avant-garde at the time.
Yeah,
modernist.
2-story columned portico. I mean, big yawn.
Yeah, now this is colonial revival in the middle of those dunes.
In the middle of those dunes, 2-story, no less. I mean, what I was saying at the beginning, you wanted something tucked in and sort of really with that marine aesthetic, right?
Exactly. And to that exact point, now this is where, now let's get into really the houses. And again, we should also give our audience a background. I mean, look, this is Beach Hampton. These are not, it's a dunescape. This was not huge parcels of property. These are small lot sizes. Early 41, it was called really the Cape Cod Beach House design. And some of these still are there, Esperanza. You still see some of them. And if you've ever read
a handful, I think. Huh?
A handful. I mean, there's books on Scheffer. You could see these designs. He began designing a Cape Cod beach house with this modernist aesthetic. And it was a colony of these really Cape Cod cottages by the shore. And again, this is Scheffer's, these are the words, his words, taking this traditional form, low, streamlined, informal beach houses that would fit into a dune landscape. Touched on this in past episodes, the Sea Spray cottages, how they're tucked into the dune,
Yeah.
And Ella Barbour built 2, a house for herself and her daughter and son-in-law for the 1941 season. And, the design reflected that Barbour aesthetic, the traditional modern form with very simple, with the modern air. Now, let's describe these houses for a second. There was her house, the Barbour house, and the Perkins house, which was on Hampton Lane, street, North-South Street, right off 27, still there. The Perkins houses had living spaces on the first floor only, while Barbour, remember that Barbour was an affluent person in the day. I mean, was financing this, but again, wanted something simple. 2 small bedrooms under the gable.
Yeah. It's a beach house.
It's a beach.
I mean, they're really, if I think about it, and we've talked about these camps, on 3 Mile Harbor,
right.
Lazy Point.
That's right.
That was the aesthetic. That was the way, you came here to camp. And be in touch with the natural environment. Just go to the beach.
And walk over to the beach.
No frills.
No amenities.
No, good segue.
Esperanza, we cannot
Don't steal my thunder.
We cannot have an episode of our Hamptons without saying amenities, but yes, no amenities. And again, similar in vibe to something that came, 10 or 15 years later in the Sands community. Modest houses. I think these were actually smaller than the Sands was 1,200 feet, I think. But,
yeah.
These are actually a little bit smaller, but just again, and I love this line, Esperanza, how Scheffer and Barbour showed the greatest restraint possible with a Cape Cod house because by foregoing dormers, they relied only on a single window in each gable to light the bedrooms. Just
honestly, isn't the whole intention to be outdoors? We've talked about this with Alistair Gordon and the whole, weekend utopia. The idea was that you're going to spend time outdoors. You're not being, tucked away in your house, in your big cavernous house.
Completely true. And again, moving the story a little bit further along, this is going from the 1940s when the Barbour House and the Perkins House was built. But then R.B. Allen introduced what they referred to as Model House Number 1, 1950 Beach Hampton. And again, Scheffer at this point, Esperanza, was now the resident architect at Beach Hampton. He was the guy.
The go-to guy.
He was the go-to guy. And Allen turned to him. Remember the original intent we spoke of at the beginning of this episode, really, something for middle-class families,
right?
To come and enjoy, and wanted these low-cost cottage designs. Allen wanted to take advantage. Remember, there were federal mortgage insurance programs for World War II veterans coming back.
Right.
5 related plans he developed. They were, again, these ads were in papers, mailings, come out this weekend. Inspect the model home on Gardner Drive. Now, we always love these numbers, and it's always hard to analyze these kind of numbers, back in the day. But 1950, $4,950 for a weekend house at the end of the earth, essentially,
on the lunar landscape.
on the lunar landscape, as Esperanza put it, of Eastern Long Island's Beach Hampton. That was still not an insignificant sum of money. For something like this, but
they had financing.
So your payments were $25 a month.
Sounds doable.
I think we could have swung that.
Yes.
Right. Now, to the point we were just talking about at the comparison with Sands, these beach houses, remember, Sands was about 1,200 feet. These were more like leisure-rama sizes. These beach houses range from 560 to 920 square feet. So the biggest was 920 feet. Esperanza, we've spoken about this a million times. That's a primary bedroom closet at this point. All right.
Nowadays that's tiny home living. You're right. That's my walk-in closet.
That's my walk-in. That's
my primary bath.
Exactly. And again, here's all of these houses, 5 designs, all designed with an eye towards cost. And again, the same, thematically, the same. The pitched roof, main block, flat roofed or shed roof wings, the main block. Talk about simple living, Esperanza. A living room, cathedral ceiling to give the aura of it being a little larger.
Yeah. The Mid-Hamptons houses were a little bit like that as well. Yeah. But it's interesting because they are kind of like open concept, in a way. So it was that modernism that really...
Exactly, as were leisure-rama. Leisure-rama did it with a screen to sort of segregate a sleeping area. But the main block, living room, cathedral ceiling, kitchen and bedroom in the wings, and the main living area, again, as Scheffer describes, sense of spaciousness with the high ceiling, but sleeping, bathing, cooking. He kept the ceiling and the volume as low as possible for the streamlined form.
It's terrific. It's like Frank Lloyd Wright. You would go and like in this little lower ceiling area, and then all of a sudden open into a vaulted ceiling, gives you the illusion of tremendous space, and you never feel confined or claustrophobic.
Completely true. And to your point, also how this is a point Esperanza has made on numerous when we discuss architecture and houses designed in this era. She says this all the time, and it's so incredibly accurate. Aren't we there to be outside? So what if your bedroom ceiling is 7 foot high? It doesn't matter. You're sleeping there.
Yeah.
You know, we spoke about it on a prior episode, how, you know, one of the Geller houses, it was like literally like a lane, like a mattress, like inside of a little cubby.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
right.
yes.
I mean, it was,
unless you're, unless you are an NBA basketball player, you don't need 11-foot ceilings everywhere.
Especially again, and we're going to get it. We're going to soon segue into, you know, the evocative times of some of our people we've reached out to tell us about this as we start to get, you know, to their personal experiences. But you were outside. You went in there to sleep, probably with sand in the bed.
Exactly. Yes.
You know, I mean, maybe you washed yourself off in the outdoor shower, but, you know, and again, you could see a great examples on the AAQ website. So, you know, anyone out there, Google AAQ, their website, Art and Architecture.
It's AAQ East End, I think.
I think so. Yeah, you could Google. I mean, and there was a book that Robert Hefner, you know, great historian out here, you know, wrote a book. Alfred Scheffer's Beach Hampton houses, 41 to 65, particularly the designs of the 40s and the 50s. And, you know, again, Hefner talks about, just to elaborate, this was some of the most innovative work of his career, you know, creating this new weekend beach house. And again, we've touched on this. The Gellers have done something, you know, similar kind of work. But again, just keeping that traditional form, you know, making the house small. And I like this, you know, how when Scheffer died in 76 at the age of 82, he was eulogized as the dean of East Hampton architects with more than, and this is really sort of heartbreaking because I can't imagine there's 100 of these houses left, but with more than 100 houses and public buildings to his name on the East End. And he had a client, Thomas Griffith, and this is his quote: "Interiors were his pride. His own taste ran to cleanliness, natural materials, simplicity. He loved wood. He loved old brick. So most of his work, though not an imitation, this is key, wasn't imitating East End style at all, but it fitted in so beautifully."
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It really, seamlessly, really, I think. I mean, if you're going to build on a dune.
Exactly right. But so that's the background of all of these houses. And we actually reached out to a couple of friends of our Hamptons podcast. And, you know, we actually, Esperanza and I spoke to one of them, and one of the others gave us a really juicy email. But, you know, we spoke to Pam Keen. Pam is someone whose family, Esperanza knows Pam better than I know Pam as well. Esperanza knows her a little better. But Pam's family bought a house, a shack, essentially, as she called it, circa 1950 on Mako Lane. And her childhood growing up here was really late 50s, early 60s. I mean, Pam described some of these things to us, Esperanza, how living on Mako Lane, no houses east or west. It was like Mako Lane. There was nothing
and
else.
Nothing else. I've seen a picture. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we'll be able to show that picture, but it's astounding. And again, you know, going back to that lunar landscape, there wasn't all the cover, you know, ground cover back then.
Right. Exactly.
No trees, no fences, no, all these both natural and man-made
completely true
did not exist.
Great point. I mean, yes, they've grown over the past 60 years and 70 years, but, you know, back then, I mean,
not after that hurricane.
Exactly. When that, along with Ella Barber's club, went into the ocean. But interestingly, she also relates how her husband, who actually also his family had a house there. They didn't know each other as kids, but interestingly, they ended up together.
Yeah.
Married to this day.
Beach Hampton connection. Yeah.
The total Beach Hampton connection. Her husband, Rich's grandmother had a house on Mako Lane. So I guess this was like a real, again, sort of a lot like Sands, very generational.
Yeah.
You know, they all sort of just lived together like that. She relayed us really cool stories about going to St. Luke's on Sunday. She thought the locals looked at her like she was an alien, but, you know, she still went every Sunday to church there. And
only when you go up street do you feel like an alien.
That's yeah. I would say that's true. But and I love this. This is probably a couple of my favorite parts about Pam's recollections. And I love this one particularly, Esperanza, how, and the cannonball train still exists. There's still a cannonball out there, right? I mean, so when the cannonball came, and again, this era, it was the fathers going to work, not the mothers. But when they went to meet Dad coming in on the cannonball, they threw pennies on the tracks and watched the train. I mean,
the entertainment value of that, right? Versus an iPad.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're not playing with a Game Boy. I mean,
truly simple pleasures.
I mean, just
paying attention to the train that's coming on the tracks and throwing your pennies out there.
Throwing your penny, getting back in the car with sand in your flip-flops, in your bed, all over the house, because who cared?
Yeah.
That's what
you was there for. Yeah, that's what you were there for.
And again, and she also had to relay the old, we all have what if stories out here on Eastern Long Island.
Definitely.
If I always relate Howard Springs, house lots when I bought my house in 1989 with $30,000 for a half acre of land, but she made one how her parents had the opportunity. Now, remember, they lived on Napeague Lane. I mean, you could sneeze to the ocean. This was, you walked a block, you were there. Yeah. It was not, this was not a reach, but they could have bought an oceanfront lot for $4,000 to $5,000 at the time. But Mom, living on Napeague Lane, said, it's too far and too lonely there.
Yeah. That would be too desolate on the ocean, right?
Yeah, exactly. We don't need that. And to wrap Pam up, and this is really a cool story too, because I asked Pam, I mean, was this strictly a summer house? Because remember, we should also bring out, these were unheated at the time.
Right. And that's why I was saying, like, these are like traditional camps where you would it was a place where you just had a roof over your head. That was pretty much it.
Completely true. So these were unheated. So I said to Pam, so like, what was it, Pam? Pam lived, they lived in Manhattan, I think later in Queens, but
they were, from Forest Hills.
Forest Hills, I believe. I said, so like after Labor Day, was that the end? Like she said, oh no.
Her father loved it out here.
I mean, they put in no insulation. They did have a wood burning stove. So they went out through November.
Yeah.
With that wood burning stove.
And you know how damp it is here.
Especially
I'm just
there.
Getting chills thinking about it.
Especially there.
I think we've just become wimpier as the years going by.
Definitely. There were no amenities to shield us at the time.
But the thought of that, that's sort of the charm, and like, talk about sense of place through her father, through her, like this is something that you almost yearn for nowadays, to have this kind of experience.
I know we do.
Yes.
I mean, maybe not, seeing all of what's going on now, but now Margie Ruddick, who was a guest of ours at a prior episode, she runs onelandscape.org. We had a great episode with her. If you haven't heard it, go back and listen, her mission. But we reached out to Margie because Margie also really grew up in Beach Hampton. Her father bought a house, still in the family. Margie still has this house, is still within her family. Bought this house in 1957, and what was even cooler about this house was it was actually the original sales office for Beach Hampton on Marine Boulevard, which is what a cool story. So, and Margie describes how the tiny office was built onto in the 1940s. When her dad bought it, her parents bought it in 1957. We're going back almost 66 years. I love this, Esperanza. 1957 Beach Hampton, 19 houses. 19 houses in that.
Well, that goes to what Pam described, right?
That's right.
Nothing east or west.
Exactly. And,
that makes it a true little community. It's like a little settlement. It's fantastic.
Completely true. And Margie describes how all the roads there were dirt roads. A lot of them still are in Beach Hampton.
Yes,
they still are. We'll call them sand. They're seems more sand than dirt. But and Margie describes how her sisters lived with a pack of kids, the Costellos, Frisbee. Now Frisbee lives in a Geller house. I've actually had the fortune of visiting the Frisbee house, that's where the little slot was where Mr. Frisbee told me his sister used to sleep literally in a little,
I missed that visit.
Exactly. Unfortunately you weren't there that day. But that was I've
seen the house.
Yeah. It's just the coolest house. And we'll get into that later because he's got an interesting neighbor now. We'll touch on that as we go along. But Margie describes how when they were kids, we would leave in the morning and just be back for dinner.
That was the way back then, though, wasn't it? Right? I mean, all around the East End, even for me.
Right. But now my kids obviously are in their 30s. Esperanza still has younger children, but we had, quote, play dates. You know, I mean, we could play. There were no play dates in Beach Hampton.
No, you would disappear. Be back in time for dinner.
Be back in time all day without shoes. You know, they'd be in the dunes and
no cell phones to know where your child was.
And she talks about these. I mean, these were such great memories she shared with us. And Margie, if you're listening, I know you do. We're so grateful for them. How they went into the dunes, like, you know, they played in the dunes, Gilbert's Path, which were developed later on in the late 60s. And they called these little sculpted concave dips in the dunes craters. And that's how they named them. And
I remember playing in those dunes too. I mean, not those, but
by near where you grew up.
Yes, near where I grew up. That was the best.
Which was beautiful and dunesy, but certainly not as dunesy as this environment was. Like this was just like
this is more endless. Yeah. But you know, I think, and Margie describes it, the beaches were wider back then.
Yeah.
So I do remember like bigger bowls.
Exactly. And like she describes how, and like just really taking us, you know, and this is something we've done so often on our Hamptons, like transport yourself back. She relates how, you know, it was filled with writers and artists. Neil Simon was there, Joseph Heller, Gwen Verdon, TV people of Bob Costello. I guess that's the Costello kids. He was the producer of, I'll date myself, I remember the Patty Duke show, you know, and Dark Shadows. And I love what she says here, how this wasn't a Hamptons party scene.
Yeah, no. It was a different time.
I
mean, parties, it wasn't like they weren't partying raucously, right? Like they were kind of partiers. It's a different thing. They didn't have marching bands. Let's put it that way. They didn't have
marching bands. They weren't catering anything. Yeah, maybe they met on the beach and made a bonfire and, you know, had s'mores.
Yeah.
You know, and just most of them were quietly.
Well, remember, the houses were small. You had to be outside.
Yes.
This was what it's about. Without outdoor kitchens, by the way.
Without outdoor kitchens, you had to be outside. There were no pools. Your bedroom had a 6.5-foot ceiling. You went there to sleep. Or in the case of the Frisbee house, you laid down in a slot. Okay. You know, and it was funny how Margie talks about this. And to your point, mentions how the beaches were wider than they are now. And there were massive tidal pools.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, you sometimes see that even, you know, to this day, you see these things and how Margie describes how they ended up there. You know, it was really a very cool story. She, in her own words, it was a stroke of luck and a little piece of anti-Semitism, how her dad was looking for a house. Now, they were in Montreal, moving to New York, and he was originally interested in those big, rambling Bluff Road shingled houses. That's historic district.
Right.
Bluff Road Historic District. Now, the real estate broker who Margie described as owning the ham radio shop. Now, I don't remember this. Esperanza doesn't either. With the tackle. But... Yeah, the tack shop. Maybe that tack shop that was on Skimhampton that she's talking about. I mean, I don't know. There was a tack shop at one point, but you're not familiar with that, right?
Oh, right in Amagansett on Main Street. I was thinking like the bait shop that's right on. Yeah. Anyway, doesn't matter. But
right. But the broker said, Doc. Now, Maggie's father wasn't Jewish, but according to Maggie, he was a psychoanalyst, had this big white beard. They just assumed he was.
Freud.
He looked like Freud. He goes, here's Jewish guy, psychoanalyst, big white Freud. Yeah. But he wasn't. Margie's mother was, but he wasn't. But he, I guess, came off that way, or they just made an assumption. But that broker sent them, you know, and maybe today we'd call this steering, profiling, whatever. But back in that day, Margie was grateful for it. Because,
fortuitous. He said, because he said, Doc, you'd be happier at the beach. Where there are more people like you.
Right, exactly. And he's saying to himself, what does that mean? But okay, I'll go with what you're saying, you know.
Yeah.
But crazy. But again, I guess we need to really wrap this up and just sort of bring it back to present day. Great friend of the show, Jaine Mehring, and, you know, we've extolled the virtues of the extraordinary work she does with Building Kind. But Jaine lives lives in Beach Hampton, has her own memories of Beach Hampton. But now Jaine's not here to say this, but I'm going to say it for her. Jaine would probably say it's not the Beach Hampton of this era in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s.
And I think we can all agree that's the case. Yeah. Unfortunately, most of these Scheffer houses have been lost to demolition, or, they've just been added onto so endlessly that they're no longer anything resembling what we've been describing.
Correct. And, there's actually even a house, we spoke of the Frisbee house. He's living in an original Geller house, right next door. We'll leave out the celebrity who bought the property next door, but needless to say, it's a looming, I'm going to guess probably 9,000 or 10,000 feet monolith, just shadowing over. And, it was interesting when we were there. I was actually at the Frisbee house with Jaine. And, we asked him about it, and he said he was very philosophical about it, Esperanza. He just said, we had 60 plus years of this house like this. It's just, he was looked at the glasses.
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Wow, that was.
Well, as there's an East Hampton Star article too about the Scheffer, Scheffer himself, the post-war pioneer, and he says they don't make beach houses like this anymore. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly.
And it's no question, it's an odd thing when families are smaller than ever, but the houses are big.
That is so true. Wow, that is really what an
that's a quote right at the begining of this article
so
too.
True. Like families are smaller, yet the houses,
just keep getting bigger.
I can't imagine. Hey, Esperanza, let's go out on a limb. I wonder if the kids at Beach Hampton now had the fun that Margie Ruddick and Pam Keen had.
They probably do. Who knows?
Right.
It's a different kind of fun, but they didn't need walkie-talkies back there inside the house. They might use them outside.
Exactly, but
nowadays you might need them inside the house.
Exactly, and then you're right.
Big house.
And you're right. Esperanza is always the cooler head. Thank heavens for her, because it's not fair to paint that with that brush. I mean, these kids are probably making their own memories, and thank goodness for it. But Esperanza, that was really. I guess it's as good a place as any to wrap up, but Beach Hampton, and again, when you look closely, you could still see some of the remnants. Changed a lot, but still a beautiful part of our East End.
World. Yeah.
And, it is evocative, but we do romanticize the past and get nostalgic, but there's still something to it. So, wow. Hey, take a ride over there later, Esperanza. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I should.
I'm sort of feeling it. Well, thanks for today. That was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Irwin. Great time always.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.